Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're on chapter 4, verse 9. I'll just read the pasuk again. Moshe says to the Bnei Yisrael, "Rak, but or only hishamer lecha, guard yourself. Ushmor nafshecha ma'od, guard yourself very much." Great emphasis. Pentishkachas hadvarim asher ro'einecha, lest you forget the matters which your eyes saw. Ven yasuru milvavcha kayimei chayecha, unless they be removed from your heart all the days of your life. Vodatam levonecha v'livnei vonecha, and you should tell them to your sons and your grandchildren, to your children and your grandchildren. And this is all pointing towards, it seems it's all pointing towards verse 10. That day that you stood before Hashem, your God, at Chorev, at Sinai, when God told me to gather the people and I'll teach them my words. Now, this emphasis of don't forget what? So Rashi says it means don't forget the words of the Torah. That this is what makes you special. This is more than anything else what you are. You can't forget it. So Rashi says, but now we're going to pick up with the Ramban. The Ramban on Pasuk Tes starts off by quoting Rashi, but then a few lines in, he goes into his own thing. Ve'enu nachon klal. The Ramban doesn't think Rashi is correct at all. Aval hakasav hazeh l'dati mitzvas lo saseh hizir bo ma'od. This is a prohibition that the Torah is giving great urgency to. Ki kasher amar shenisar b'chol mitzvos v'nishmar achukim v'mishpatim lasosam ba'aretz. We've been told that we need to be diligent about all the mitzvos and to observe them, particularly in the land of Israel. Chazar v'amar. Now God revisits the point. Moshe revisits the point, and he says, "Rak ani mazhircha ma'od lishamer v'lishmor nafshcha ma'od ma'od." We already said you have to do the mitzvos. If you have to do the mitzvos and you have to make sure to get them right, why would the Torah tell me and don't forget them? If you tell me I have to do it, imagine someone goes to the doctor. The doctor says this medication is very important. It's very important you not miss a dose. It's very important you take it every day. And then the doctor says at the end, and don't forget about the medication. Of course, don't forget about the medication. You told me to take it. You told me it's very important. So you got to do the mitzvahs, and don't forget them. Of course, you can't forget them. The Ramban says this is a new point, that you need to know from where these mitzvos came. You need to understand the origin of the mitzvos. It's essential that you not forget the scene at Mount Sinai, all the things that you saw, hakolos v'alapidim, the voices, es kvodo v'esgado, the greatness of God. Excuse me. Udvar v'sher shamata sham bitocha eish, and his words that you heard there from the fire. V'sodia kol advar asher ro elecha b'mamad nichbarahu livonecha v'livnei vonecha ad olam. You must impart all of this. It's not enough that you remember Har Sinai. You have to impart the scene of Sinai to your children, your grandchildren, throughout the generations. Ufeiresh hatam. The reason is ki asa Hashem amamarahu kedei shetilmatu liyira oso kol hayamim. God, why did God make that whole special effects show of Har Sinai? What did we need it for? It was to inspire us to always live with reverence for Him. And we should teach our children for generations. Im kain asu atem kacha v'al tishkuchu oso. So it's incumbent upon us to remember it. So a very, very different pshat than Rashi said. Ramban says, what will help you be diligent about these mitzvos is if you remember the scene of Har Sinai, the inspiring, awe-inducing scene of Har Sinai. V'hine, kodem she, and convey it to your children. V'hine kodem she'izker adibro shenemru sham. So, we're about to go through the 10 commandments here because we're reenacting in a small way, the scene of Sinai. Before we go through the 10 commandments, we first have a commandment to not forget anything from that scene. And we may not allow it to leave our hearts forever. So that's the prohibition. We may not forget it. Midor l'dor, we should pass this on for generations, from generation to generation. Everything we saw there, everything we heard there. The effect, the purpose of this mitzvah is much. Afal pishin vuasun is amsa ba'osav mosim. Im yakum b'kirbeini novi ocholem chalom. V'yitzavenu b'hefach min haTorah. V'yitein elenu oso mofes. Yikanei safek b'leivu anashim. This is a very important. This is a very, very important point. Lahavdil. We were talking before about a doctor. So let's go back to a doctor for a moment. Let's say a person has a doctor. They've been going to this doctor for years, and the doctor attended the finest institutions, and the doctor always seems to be on the ball, and the doctor is regularly quoted in medical journals. They feel really, really good about their doctor. Fine, wonderful. And then the day comes where they're at some party and they meet some other doctor, and they're told something totally different. And this doctor has an extremely impressive resume. So now what do I do? What do I do now? So we believe in Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu is this great prophet. But let's say somebody comes along and says, you know something? God spoke to me. And God told me, no more Shabbos. We don't do Shabbos anymore. Well, you can't go against her. This is, you know what? If I'm right, let it be spelled in neon lights across the sky right now. And it is. So at some point you have to begin to ask yourself, so maybe he's the real guy. Maybe he's more impressive. Maybe he outranks Moshe. I don't know. So even if we believe in Moshe, you never know if someone's going to come along at some point who'll put doubt in our hearts. But when we think about the scene of Har Sinai, it's not just Moshe Rabbeinu told us something or another, and we found him to be credible. Klal Yisrael, our great-great-great-grandparents heard and saw things directly themselves at Har Sinai. It's not only what Moshe Rabbeinu told them. Naklish kocholek v'chomestapik. Then if anyone disagrees with what we learned from the Torah, we can always say, I hear you, you're impressive, but I know this to be true. Unishakeroso. We will fight back, we'll push back against the person. Lo yo ilehu os. There's no sign he can bring us that will make us stop believing in the Torah, because we know it not just from Moshe, we know it from the rank and file of our nation. They saw it, they heard it at Har Sinai. We know the guy is lying. If he says the Torah wasn't given, we know he's lying. And that was the intent at the giving of the Torah. There's different pshat about this, but the Ramban says when God says to Moshe before the giving of the Torah, they'll believe in you forever. Says the Ramban, this is what he means. When Klal Yisrael sees the giving of the Torah, it reinforces the belief in Moshe, because it's not just about Moshe now. It's about the Torah. Yedu shayadavar emes below safek. Now, none of us were at Har Sinai. I mean, forgive me for being presumptuous, but I think it's true that none of us were at Har Sinai. So what does this Ramban have to do with us? So the Ramban says, well, if it's told by generation to generation that they were at Har Sinai, so my grandparents weren't at Har Sinai, but their grandparents spoke to someone who spoke to someone who spoke to someone who were at Har Sinai. Kilo noid sheker levanenu. We know we would not say falsehood to our children. And we would not give over to them as inheritance falsehood. Words that are ineffective. If we pass it on from generation to generation, they won't doubt it. They'll believe it. Very powerful Ramban. So the Ramban says this is why it's so very essential that it be imparted from parent to child to grandchild, that there was a scene of Har Sinai, because through this we'll be secure in our observance of the Torah. Two comments. First of all, just it might be a little bit hard still for us to understand this because we talk about it, but probably it's so many generations back. But I'll just give you a mushal, maybe a little bit closer to home. That if somebody came up to us on the street and said, "Do you really believe there was a Holocaust?" We would think of it as a preposterous question. Why would we think of it as a preposterous question? We know there are people who walk around this planet who don't think there was a Holocaust, because so many of us know people who experienced the Holocaust, or know people who experienced the Holocaust. So that, just if you think of that as a mushal a little bit for what he's talking about, and to pass it on is this vital thing through the generations. The second point, I'm sure many of you are aware of this, the idea of this Ramban, a takeoff on this idea, is actually one of the great arguments made for proving the truth of Judaism. Because generally speaking, other faith groups have a moment of revelation that was in private. In other words, whoever it is, Muhammad comes and says, "God spoke to me, and I'll tell you what he said." So they're taking him at face value. But the greatest moment of revelation that gives the guidance for everything that we do and everything we believe in, this Torah is the center of it all. This happened bifnei am ve'eda, in front of everyone. So could you imagine Moshe Rabbeinu referencing to the children of the people who were allegedly on Har Sinai? It's so important. You all remember this. It's so important to keep on imparting it and to never forget about it. If their parents hadn't been in Har Sinai, they would have all looked at Moshe and said, "What are you talking about? We don't know what you're talking about." And so the fact that the central moment of our faith system was so public, it's a tremendous proof. It's a very interesting thing to think about. Okay. I want to show you a different shot here in the Sforno. Sforno on Pasuk Tes. Raki Shomer Lecha, guard yourself. Afal pi shomarti, sheroi shetiu nechshavim chachamim le'enei ha'umos. Even though I've made it clear that it's appropriate that you should be considered wise in the eyes of the generations. We haven't seen this pasuk, but there's a pasuk that talks about that the nations will have such admiration for you, for the brilliance of your Torah. Hishamer lecha mideos chachmeim hamachishim mitzios hakel yisparach v'yecholto vashkochaso. Be careful. Even though I've told you that the nations of the world will be very impressed with your Torah and your theology, don't allow yourself to be impressed by their theology. In other words, it might be enticing. Well, I'll just talk this stuff with them and they'll be so impressed. Now, they'll have some questions and they'll have their own doubts. That's okay. And that's fine if they have doubts. But don't allow yourselves to forget and to not recognize the importance of that which I teach you in the Torah. In other words, the value of the Torah is not rooted in the nations of the world accepting it or not accepting it. The value of the Torah is that you know its truth and never allow yourselves to forget that. So we had Rashi, the Ramban, and the Sforno, and what it means that you shouldn't forget, whether it be the words of the Torah, whether it be the scene of Har Sinai.